is that there is a thread of absolute law that would follow from the oneness space all the way down to the goldfish in the bowl. There's a thread that would not actually shift or break or change in any way. Is that accurate?
This is the deep dive with Adam Roa.
And that oneness space, depending on how you believe around, the metaphorical and physical representation of like the Big Bang, the creation from the void, so ancient texts in the void, essentially there was nothing until God created. And there, that represented by the Big Bang and all of the things that creation emerged from, right? And so, right. But before that, there was a void, essentially, of nothingness. And in the void of nothingness, again, highly esoteric, metaphysical, and just a deep dive question, is in that void of nothingness, the absolute truth no longer exists because there's now a nothingness. And so only in the creation of existence does it give the parameters of some kind, even if it's a oneness spirit source thing for the truth to exist. And then there's all the layers from that oneness space all the way down. And what I'm hearing from you is that there is a thread of absolute law that would follow from the oneness space all the way down to the goldfish in the bowl. There's a thread that would not actually shift or break or change in any way. Is that accurate?
Close to it. I would say in everything, not even just the oneness space, right? The void also represents an aspect of oneness. And so it's through all of it. So yeah, the notion of the thread is through every aspect. So something, because the way if we would use that language, right, I would say there's something that is still the container for the void. It's like that, like, it's like this, no matter how vast we go, there's a thread that, and instead of, I like to use the word system instead of law, because it's really, that's just what it is. It's like, it's a system of operating that applies to everything. And I had an experience several, but this one that stuck to me most. There's experiences I had that I still haven't found a way to express it yet, because language genuinely doesn't operate properly to express the experience I had.
It doesn't operate properly for a lot of shit,
a lot of shit, right? Yeah, 100%. 100%. So there's like stuff like this is sitting in here that like I would love to just like project a reel, and
scare everyone.
Terrified.
Like, don't let me in, Kevin. Don't let me into that space, bro. That needs to stay in your head. What are you doing? Fry people's systems.
For real. So there was an experience I had that was like, it felt like the notion of what source point is, and I could genuinely feel and sense and experience everything. It was like every choice, every consciousness, every concept, everything, every notion. It was like from the imagination where ideas live, with the thought streams inside of ideas, and then my brain being an access point to flow with them through my consciousness, or through my consciousness being an access point for my brain to flow them through here, to then find the synapses that make all this work, to then take air and flip it with my muscles in my mouth to then speak. And then the air is riding on speak, that there was no separation in any of it. And everything had a piece of the all of creation dancing together across the board infinitely. And it was a pulse. So that's when I like to describe things as the pulse of creation, so that everything is a pulse. Our breath is a pulse, rhythm, pulse, right? Ebbs and flow, pulse. It all represents a pulse in creation. And I describe it like a pulse, where if you had the phenomena of oneness then pulsing into the form of every possibility, and then as soon as it does that, it's right back to the notion of it all in completeness. But even as I describe it, I'm describing a sequence. my experience of is it wasn't even a sequence. It was like, it was happening and not happening, dancing together. And so it was the strangest thing, but it landed for me as the notion of how everything works. And when I came out of that experience and I started to, it drastically shifted perspective. And everything I looked to explore to see that met has proven true every time. Understanding communication, understanding human interaction and interaction in nature, understanding all these different dynamics. And so for me, from that experience, which already compounded on other things I've been experiencing up to that point, that thread you talk about is exactly that. There's like this source point that represents everything, including the idea of a void. And it is the thing that is in everything as that unwavering truth of system for all of creation that then can explore in any possible way it wants to. And it exploring in every possible way it wants to never once contradicts its own essence. And that's how I would describe truth in that framework.
So what popped up for me when you're describing the pulsing, but in your experience of the pulsing itself is really only in the like linearity aspect of trying to comprehend it, when in reality it's both pulsing and not pulsing at the same time. Or people who are listening to this are going, what the fuck are you guys on? But like what pops up for me is actually essentially what we can see as a fractal representation of that in how an electron field works, where it's actually just potentiality, waveform potentiality. And in the observation of it, it becomes the particle form. So it's actually the full potentiality, and it's also the electron at the exact same time in the observation, which to me, and you know, I'm not a scientist, so like people who are scientists are like, this is the part where Adam just like shows that he's just a hippie and not a scientist. But like, to me, what that shows is like, it's all period. It's all period. And our focus of consciousness is what brings it into the let's call it the exhale, right? It's the solidification into this moment that you and I are having is because of the focus of consciousness on this moment. Whereas when it's not in focus of this moment, therefore it's not in focus of this linear time, it's not in whatever, it's back into the electron field of infinite possibility, which is that spread exhale pulse at the same time. So that's what I receive in like how it's both at once. And I want to hear from you then, what is the thread? Because I feel like you have a few threads that you, I'm going to say this nicely, go all the way, go all the way through. And I'd love to hear what those are and know that I'm also viewing it through. It's not even that I necessarily have or am looking to be like, that's not true in any way. But I come from the lens of I've experienced moments of complete everything I've known no longer being true, to hold space for the idea that what I believe to be true is simply I've gone from goldfish bowl to room to house to street to city to whatever. And I've been expanding my consciousness more and more. And there may be a thread that has been there since the goldfish bowl to the freaking country that I'm in, but there's still more to go. And because of the experience of having my world shifted, I hold space for it may shift at some point. And so what is the threads, what are the threads that you feel like are unmoving to that singularity point of existence itself? Yeah, beautiful. And I like you said, a couple of threads. So if we had to think of them being intertwined, right? Like a wire of a thread is, and again, it goes back to the thing that can apply to everything. So, you know, I have the 7 facts are what I built my entire practice on. And to me, I call them facts because they literally hold up in any framework thus far.
And I feel will continue to, only because of the way they're designed. So with the first fact being the self, right? The self, the entirety of all it is limitless, boundless, and always connected, meaning that it's always a part of everything, that the access to it is vast and limitless, and where we can go with it is equally boundless. And your own experience of life, my experience of life, of that exact notion of I continue to grow and expand, and everything I thought I knew is not even close to what is actually there. And so the thing that actually acknowledges that is an aspect of truth, is like, that's the space of, one thing I can say for sure, there's always more to uncover. Like, I don't know what else is going to be there. And it's like, and there's always more to explore within the self. And so that is always going to be there. The thing that is understanding the infinites, while also understanding how it can apply to this moment. So if in this moment I can access a Kevin that is subdued and quiet, and
this is the most subdued I've seen you, by the way.
Yeah, right. Legit. And I can access a Kevin that's, let's go for it all. Right. And I can do it at a moment's notice. And so can everyone else. And the degree of understanding that is the degree of self-acceptance, which we can get to a whole nother aspect of, but that's one of them. So the self is limitless, balance, always connected.
So let me respond to each of these, right? Because for me, what comes up in this first one is like, to me, that sounds like swimming in the ocean and thinking it's infinite, and going, well, like, to your awareness, it's infinite and boundless, so to speak. And yet swim far enough, you're going to hit shore. You know what I mean? And so it's not actually boundless. And here's the thing, I can't prove that. Like, maybe literally our consciousness itself, there is no limit, or we're just in something that in our current state of consciousness is so large, it would be a near impossibility for us to actually hit the edges of what we could capacitate. And so the knowing of, is it actually boundless, or is there just so much storage and what we're swimming in that, and again, it might be semantics. I don't know that there's even really a way to tell the difference, but from an absolute truth standpoint, that differentiation is pretty important.
I love that. And so what I would express to that is, whatever the form of consciousness may be, right, in which it can house a lot, is like where you take it to the ocean and then there's a shore. I would then say the shore is now another exploration of it also, which can continue to go into whatever that may hit, and whatever that may hit will be an exploration of it also. And to me, that's the notion of limitless. It's not emboldened to one form. It's emboldened to the constant exploration of possibility.
Assuming that so then what is the bounds of self? Right? Because the self is boundless, right? And so the self, as me, Adam Roa, is going to hit the shore. And the moment I hit the shore, I'm no longer Adam Roa. That was the bounds of Adam Roa. So now I'm this, where you and I are now the same oversoul. And so it's still the self, but now not the self that we know in this form, until it hits oneness, which is God. And so that's where the fractal is of myself. When you say self is boundless, you're simultaneously saying God is boundless, existence itself, because that is ultimately what I am a fractal of.
Yeah, exactly. It's like existence itself is. And to me, the key is exactly.
Would you say it like that, Kevin? Jeez.
Why has it got to be so? It's like, because and that's the fractal is the key, is when something lands in the same way, no matter the degree of capacity, that's always going to be the signal. Because that isn't a small thing. Like it's so dope to me. And I think that's one of the things that stays open, and why my access to certain spaces is like, it's so dope to the notion that things that seemingly, if you looked at it a certain way on the surface, wouldn't necessarily operate a similar way, but yet when you start to explore other angles, or you're willing to just take a little more time to observe it, or you're willing to like explore it at a different angle, you'll see these spaces that continue to meet. And so the fractal piece is such an important awareness to have in the notion of this, for that to be met. And so when I say the self is limitless, balanced, and always connected, and why I describe it as the self is exactly that. Because you have the atoms of atom, the molecules of atom, the cells of atom, the cell structures of atom, and that
we would all say have their own consciousness.
They all have
right?
their consciousness, and then until you get to Adam, and Adam's still one portion of the greater self, that's there, which is a portion of, and we dance and play in this on a regular basis and have experiences of it, where sometimes we often take them for granted or think they're like, I don't know, thoughts in our head or hallucinations or certain things, when tangibly the experience is actually revealing itself to be a lot. And if we were willing to explore that, actually see how that stuff shows up on a regular basis. And that's kind of what my journey had been like, in even getting to a point of recognizing these facts that represent to me the thread, or what I call the pillars in the structure of existence.
And do you believe it's possible that we actually are an experiment within a container itself that has a bounds? So meaning, like, let's say God, creator over here, creates this like thing over here, and we are everything you're saying 100%, boom, 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 but held within a container where, like a goldfish in a bowl, like at a certain point, we're not actually a part of this over here. We're actually in this petri dish of God's thing. And so we are in a self-contained thing. So it isn't actually boundless. It will feel boundless because all of the existence that we know, but as part of a greater whole, it's in a silo. Is that possible?
Well, I would say that being in a container is possible, yet the container still wouldn't be the end of us fully. Like whatever that additional space is, whatever that thing is beyond the container, that moreness still applies to me. So the possibility of even this being a simulation inside of a simulation inside of a simulation, right? All of that is valid explorations of creative potential. And as long as existence, creation, or anything has a reach towards something, thus does it apply. And that's
have you heard the thought experiment where they talked about this being the simulation? And there's like, we get to a point where we can create a simulation that of it, like the Matrix or whatever. And we create a simulation, and that point hits a point where it can create a simulation, and that point hits a point. And so it's like an experiment to see what humanity is doing. And we're in a simulation. And this thought experiment, I can't remember, you can probably find it online, where the question is, if you could get to a point where you create the simulation, like if in our existence, we created a simulation and we saw human beings doing their thing, and we were like observing them, and they're like doing this thing within the simulation. And we get to a point where we can turn the simulation off and we can shut it down. And you can imagine that, right? So now the real question is, one, do you believe we will get to the point where we can run a simulation for like human consciousness, to observe human consciousness do it again, and create itself? And if you believe that to be true, then is it not likely that we are actually not patient zero, but we are one of the simulations in this pecking order? And if that's likely, and you can imagine that, then three, when you get to the point where you go, okay, did we learn enough, and should we turn the simulation off and start over? The real question is, how many layers above you are having that exact same conversation about turning this simulation off? And so it's just a really interesting thought experiment. And so I guess using that as the example, if we're within the simulation and we can be turned off, if we can be turned off in that way, then for me, the thread stops there.